I don't like this one. Let's avoid this topic. And if you have never struggled with this topic, good for you. You can walk out the back because I know you're lying. No, I'm just kidding. We all have struggled with God and his timing. Whether it was 10 years ago or whether it's today. We're like, okay, God, when's this going to happen? Why hasn't it happened? Why does it not look this way? Why have I not met my perfect soulmate yet? Why don't I have the perfect dream life? Why have I not retired? Why have I not got that vacation I've been wanting, I deserve? I know for me, waiting for these things, growing up was super hard. I wanted it all now or as soon as possible, and I feel a lot of us struggle with waiting on the Lord. To move, am I wrong? 3 church restarts, starting with just 6 people, and they were all family members, coming from across the country and then COVID. Even this church went through a long waiting period to get to where we are today, right? But God was faithful, and here we are today. The funny thing is, we aren't the only ones that struggled with this, though. Just like everything in the Bible, we can read it and learn from the experiences of those involved, right? Because many characters in the Bible struggled with God and his timing as well. But in the end, we're all blessed because of God making them wait. For instance, in Genesis 18:1-15, God promises to give Abraham and Sarah a child. But what does Sarah do? Sarah refuses to believe God. She even laughs and mocks God for his promise, claiming she and Abraham are far too old. The thought of her bringing life into this world seems ridiculous to her. Because in the world's understanding, it simply is what? Impossible. It can't happen. Abraham trusts God, but he thinks it's not exactly how God said it would be. And so what does Abraham do? He messed up a little bit, and all of a sudden he has a kid with a concubine. Not God's intention. Both struggled to trust the Lord in the waiting period, didn't they? But even out of their not trusting God, we see in Genesis 21:1-7 that God was faithful. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age. Abraham and Sarah were in disbelief of God and his promise, even to the extent of mocking him or trying to do it their own way. Yet God was still faithful, and in his perfect timing, fulfilled his promise like he always does, right? Abraham and Sarah were very much like who? Us. Impatient. Wanting God to move on their timing and their what? Understanding. Isn't that funny? I want to challenge you for a second. Isn't that funny? Wanting God to move in a way that we understand or in a way that we want him to move. Does that sound familiar? I'm not going to point fingers because, as Rick says, when you point a finger, there's 3 more pointing back at you. But I'm not going to point at anybody and say this, but does that sound familiar? God, why did you not do that? God, do it this way and then I'll see it's you. God, do it this way and it'll make me happy. No. See, I want to ask you a simple and very basic question. Could you have imagined if God would have done it Abraham and Sarah's way? When we read the Bible, we'd be like, oh, God promised him a lineage, and God promised him all these amazing things that his ancestors would outnumber the sand and the dust and everything like that. And then we find out that it happened because of a concubine. Would that mean anything to us? Or would that kind of leave a bad, sour taste to our mouth a little bit? Let's be honest. If I read the Bible and God promised all these amazing things, but then man was the only way to fulfill it, does that sound like God? Not even a little bit. That story wouldn't even have been noteworthy. It wouldn't even involve God. See, but God out of his mercy is faithful, right? God out of his mercy, even in our disobedience, is faithful. And what we see in Abraham and Sarah's story is God coming through. And coming through with that promise exactly the way he said it would happen. Because he's not a liar. But here's my question. Why do we question God then? For instance, God said, come to Denton. We're going to plant a church. Has it made sense along the way, brother, how we got here? Not every day, but some days it feels like we're on the skin of our teeth, but you know who we know has our back? God. We went from 6 people now standing in front of a full church, not of just people, a family. See, that's the amazing thing about God is he never changed. We started with 6 family members. Now we have a whole lot more family members a part of this church. Isn't that a praise God thing? He doesn't change. He promised that he would bless this ministry, bless this church. He spoke to Rick specifically and said that he would bless this church. So what is he doing? Blessing this church. Did it look the way Rick and everybody that came thought it would? Not you. You hear the giggles because they're like, heck no, this is not what we expected. Wednesday night, I had this crazy idea. I was like, imagine if God would have told all of us what it would have looked like when we came here. Would we have come here? It's crazy, right? You would have came here, but then you're like, oh, that looks daunting. That looks crazy. Oh, Lord, I have to go through all that. Oh, that does not sound fun, right? We often forget what God sees is often beyond our imagination and bigger and better than we could ever come up with. Waiting on the Lord means not looking through our eyes or coming up with a perfect strategy of how to achieve it. It means trusting in the Lord to come through in a way that we could never expect. Because then who gets the glory? He does. If it's something we could conjure up, the man could do that. Everything that brought us to this church, that brought us to this building, that brought every single one of you here is God. Listen to the testimonies. You can walk around the room and every single person was brought to this church for a reason, for a purpose. They were seeking, and what did God do? He brought them where they exactly needed to be. See, another example in the Bible is the story of David. I love this. Because David, historians guess, this is a rough guesstimate because it never really actually says what age he was whenever he was anointed king by Samuel. It says he was roughly around the age of 10 to 15 years old. See, in 1 Samuel 16:13, so Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. So, how many of you believe that David just became instantly king after he was anointed? Did he just become king overnight and everything was rainbows and butterflies and beautiful after that? Was it like Samuel was like, oh, you're going to be king, and David's like, oh, thank you. And the next day he was king and he was like, oh, I'm 15 years old running a nation. Does that make sense? Would you like to run a nation? No, not at all, right? That does not sound fun. I wouldn't want to run a nation right now. And I'm 26. I'm 10 years older than that. That sounds crazy to me. See, we think it would be all rainbows and butterflies for David, but no, next we see David slaying Goliath. Do you think he gets praised and glorified and, oh, great job for this? No, he gets banished by Saul. Then David goes into hiding in the desert, constantly running from Saul, the man who is now trying to kill him. He's crying out to God, asking him how long this would take, how long he must suffer. David was forced out of the nation that he was supposed to be king of. He fought in many, many battles, and finally, after many, many years, we read in 2 Samuel 5:4, David was 30 years old when he became king and reigned for 40 years. Imagine that. Being prophesied to, being told that you are going to be the king of a nation, and then waiting 15 years until that happens. Being hunted down, being chased, being persecuted, having every opportunity to kill the one that's pursuing you, but knowing that's the wrong thing to do. Knowing that God's called you to be a king, but waiting until God puts you in that role. Imagine immediately facing a Goliath, slaying it by the strength, and then having to run away from the man you saved. And it doesn't stop there. Now, each of you, I want you to imagine you're in David's shoes. Now you're living and you're running for years. And finally, after many years, you finally get what God said. It sounds crazy, right? In man's perspective, it sounds ridiculous. It's like, why would I do that? Why would I go through 15 years of torture when I could just become king, right? What the heck are you doing, God? Why are you doing this to me? I thought I was supposed to be king. I can imagine David saying that. How many of you, if you were in David's shoes and all of a sudden you were prophesied to be king, God promised you, maybe it's not even a king. God said you're going to have a wife. And you're like, oh my gosh, all the relationships I've been in, they're disastrous. Why is nothing working out? God, you said I'm supposed to find a wife, and I know I'm going to find a wife. And God, I haven't met her for 10 years. What the heck's going on? Or God, I've been serving you, but there's nothing coming from it. For instance, my grandpa, ministering to him for almost 10, 12 years. And then the last meeting I meet with him telling me he's ready to see Jesus. Do you know how many years I prayed? How many years me and my family prayed for him? And then hearing on his last moment with me and Mackenzie that he was ready to go home again with Jesus. Praying for my family and praying that they would reunite at church, and then finding out my stepdad, who I've been praying for years, is going back to church. Saying at our wedding, his emotions opened up and he could feel again. You know how many prayers I spent? How many times, and I'd be on my knees begging God to reach those two? And years later, seeing God being faithful to his promise, not in the way I thought he would do it. Not in the way that I thought was perfect, but in the beautiful way that only God could do. It gives me chills, guys, because that's our God. That's the God we worship. Yes, David went through this crazy situation, which he was prophesied to. He was going to be king, and he went through all this stuff, but I have a question. Do you think that everything David went through prepared him to be a king? It's kind of like God has a plan. You know, one of the biggest things I really have been stressing with, lately is, is your faith in God's timing? Or is it in the process or how it happens? Or is it in Jesus? Should be in Jesus, right? Should be. But how many of us, every single day, we wake up and we're like, okay, God, I don't care how you do it. I don't care. I'm not even going to think about it. All I see is you. Or how many of us, we count the bills? We count the stresses of the day. We're like, I don't know how we're going to make it. I don't know how this is going to happen. I don't know what you're going to do, God. This doesn't make sense. Or do we relent and we say, no, I just trust you, God. However it happens, I know I can trust you. There's a keen difference. See, and every single day I can tell you that I have to fight that mindset. When I wake up in the morning, I have a mindset shift. I can wake up and be woe is me. And I can plan my entire life, or I could say, no, God, I trust you with my life because I gave you my life whenever I was a kid. And so I release it to you. See, do you trust God with bringing that perfect spouse? Do you trust God to provide what you need? Do you trust him with the perfect job? Do you trust him to fix your family, to reach your kids? Do you trust him with tomorrow, let alone today? Do you trust the Lord with whatever you are waiting for? I want us to pause right now in this moment. It's not going to be a long, awkward pause. But I really want you to pause and consider. What is the thing right now you are waiting on? And I really want you to consider, are you waiting on that thing to happen, or are you trusting the Lord with it? What is the thing that you're holding on to with your sharp hands as much as you can, and you refuse to let it go because it's not going the exact way that you thought it would? What is that thing? And why are you not trusting God with it? Kind of a deep question, isn't it? Kind of a hard question. I remember as a youth pastor, I'd have parents come up to me, and they'd be like, my son is lost. And I've been praying for 6 years that he'd find Jesus. I've been praying for 6 years, and I'm about to give up. You know what I'd tell them? Give up. No, I would never say that. Every single time I'd say, don't give up. Don't give up. Do not give up. Keep praying. Pray harder. When you feel like giving up, pray more for your child because they're worth praying for. And the crazy thing is every single time, God is always faithful, and he's so beautiful, because all of a sudden I'd have them come back to me a month later, and they're like, what's going on with my kid? All of a sudden, they're starting to talk about Jesus more. All of a sudden, God is on their mind. Their behavior's shifting. All of a sudden, they're asking questions, and then the next week, they dedicate their life to the Lord, and I'm like, you didn't quit praying, did you? It didn't look the way you thought it would, but God is faithful. Always. And in a world full of me timing and a lot of things that are going on that are crazy, we need to release a lot more to the Lord, don't we? And we need to trust the Lord a lot more with what he's doing. Because God's story is a whole lot more beautiful than the story we could write. See, I will be honest with you. I was called to be a senior pastor someday. God told me at a youth camp whenever I found my calling to be a pastor. The Lord literally spoke it. It's one of the very first times I've heard the audible voice of God other than whenever I was first saved. And God said, you will someday, this is what you are called to do, to be a senior pastor for the lost. I heard it directly from the Lord. Do I know how God's going to make that happen? No. Do I know when God's going to make that happen? I have no earthly idea. Do I know exactly every single thing that he's going to do to get that day to come? No. But I refuse to be so fixated on that future that I miss the amazing things he's teaching me today, that he's doing in my life today. Because we as human beings, and every single one of us in this room can be honest with ourselves, we get so fixated over there that we miss every single step that's in between here and there. What if every single year, every single day that passes until God puts me in that role, he teaches me how to fulfill that role? I don't want to do anything if God has not placed me there himself. That's one of the things that I love about Ignite is it's not anything based on what you do or who you are. It's solely based on what God says. That's it. You walk in the door and you're not treated because, oh, that's a new person. They skipped last Sunday. No, that's not what we think. We love you unconditionally because of who you are, because that's what God's called you to do. I could care less whenever I'm a senior pastor, because God's called me right now in this moment to fulfill this role. And if I'm so focused over there, I will not fulfill this role correctly. Am I wrong? Do you want somebody to work a job preparing for the job over there, or do you want somebody that's going to do the job correctly so that they can earn over there? Right? What makes a little bit more sense? See, David, every single thing that David went through, every single thing he faced made him a better and stronger king for Israel. He learned to lean on the Lord. He learned to trust in the Lord completely. He learned to be strong no matter what he faced. Because of the waiting, David was a better king for Israel. What if in the waiting, God is prepping you for what you are waiting for? Because right now you aren't ready for it. Whew. A few years ago, I wasn't ready to be a husband. I can tell you 100%. I was not ready to be a husband. 2 years ago, I was not ready to be a husband. A year ago, I was not ready to be a husband. But God knew I wasn't ready to be a husband, so what did God do? Whew. Every single day, he prepped me for that role. Every single day, he hardened me. He made me stronger. He made me a better man. He made me lean on him more. He made me learn more about God. He made me learn more about how to be a better man, how to be a shepherd for a family. And after 2 years, God prepped me to be a husband. And here I am in God's perfect timing, a husband. Waiting is hard because the ability to wait on the Lord stems from being confident and focused on who God is and in what he is doing. It requires faith in God. In the waiting, we learn to trust God for who he is, because he is worthy of putting our faith, our hopes, and our dreams. He is worth trusting, even if it requires waiting. So I have a question. Do you trust God and believe him to be faithful and worth the wait? Let me ask that one more time for those in the back. Do you trust God and believe him to be faithful and worth the wait? In my own research, I found 36 scriptures alone in just a 30-minute time window in which call and describe God as faithful, because he is. But one of my favorite out of all the verses that I read and found was Psalms 89, 1 through 2. It says, I will sing of the mercies of the Lord forever. With my mouth will I make known your faithfulness to all generations. For I have said, mercy shall be built up forever. Your faithfulness you shall establish in the very heavens. We worship a faithful God. Now, whether that happens tomorrow doesn't change who our God is today. He is faithful. Whether I found Mackenzie yesterday or 2 years ago or even today, he is still faithful. Whether he answers exactly what you're thinking he should answer or not, he is still faithful. See, God gave me this sermon during my wedding. Isn't that crazy? God gave me this sermon during my wedding. And it was during a crazy time. Rick and Mackenzie were doing their father-daughter dance. And I stood there. And I have to protect myself from getting emotional at this part. I sat there. All of my family and friends and loved ones sitting there watching us, smiling in support. It was like a dream. I sat there in awe of the beautiful, amazing woman God had brought me, and literally how she was everything I had ever dreamed of and more. And then I saw my amazing church family that all came to the wedding to celebrate our marriage. It was like a dream. It was so beautiful. It felt like a dream, but it wasn't a dream. It was reality. And then the Lord said something that hit me, and I have to look at it because I have to make sure I read it exactly word for word. He said, my timing and what I have for you far surpasses anything you could ever dream up, doesn't it? And that hit me like a brick. Because I remember past relationships sitting there begging God that he'd make it work. I remember sitting in churches begging God that I'd be loved like a family, that these churches wouldn't just call us a family and actually would treat me like a son. I remember this. I remember begging and pleading. Because 2 years ago, I was leaving Stinnett, puking literally my guts up with blood because I was so stressed and anxious. I was completely and utterly alone. And I remember falling on my knees and begging and pleading, God, I need a church family. I've served you. I've been a youth pastor. I've served you relentlessly, but I feel like I'm alone. God, I beg of you, I need a woman who can stand beside me and make me better for your kingdom. I'm tired of searching my way. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of searching for a church and trying to make it what it's supposed to be. I'm tired of trying to make a girl what I deserve or what you've called me to have. I'm tired of searching my way. I release it. I'm done. And here I stand today, God faithful. I'm no longer alone. I have my soulmate, the one that literally God made for me. That makes me better for the kingdom. I'm surrounded by a church family that loves me, that supports me, that has my back. Whenever you walk through the doors, it's not just a church pew that you fill. You are loved. You are cared for. When you're not here, we miss you. We don't call you and chastise you for it. No, we miss you. We're like, hey, we don't care that you are gone. We just miss you. I thought it was so awesome. And I'm going to share this, sorry. Rick, yesterday, we were sitting at the table, and Rick was like, oh my gosh, I miss George's voice. I'm like, what? like I've never heard that before. He's like, I just want to talk to George. I just miss that guy. And he just called George, and he was like, George, I miss you, brother. And they've seen each other in like a few days, but he just missed him. But isn't that family? Isn't that how it's supposed to be when you're gone? You're like, oh, I feel like I missed it this Sunday. We were on our honeymoon, and yes, it was amazing to have a break, but I was like, I miss everybody. I did. I'll be real. See, I was sitting there, now officially a married man, and I was holding back tears. Because for years, I'd been begging God for that moment. For years, I'd been begging God for that day. And the crazy thing is I've dreamt of that day. I've literally had dreams of that day. And I can stand before you. My dreams couldn't even come close to that moment. That's our God. Yes, you may have to wait a little bit longer. Yes, it may not look exactly the way you intended it to look. But he's faithful, isn't he? Would you rather have a thrown together mess that looks all right and suffices, or would you rather have what God has for you that is beautiful, that is magical, that is like a dream, and you're trying to pinch yourself to wake up because God is so faithful? That's what my wedding day was. I had to pinch myself when she was walking down the aisle. I was like weeping because she was everything I've dreamed of and more. God is faithful. See, I don't know what you're waiting on right now, or what you may be facing, or what you're waiting on God to do. But trust me when I say God's way is worth the wait. Because he has such a beautiful story written for you. And just like my wedding day, God's plan doesn't even seem real because of how truly beautiful it is. And I can stand here today in front of you all and tell you it's definitely worth the wait. I don't know what you're facing. I don't know what you're waiting on. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what you're waiting on God to do, for him to bless a ministry, to bring more people for you to minister to leave a legacy. Maybe God is trying to, you're like, I just want to find a job to be able to sustain myself. I want to find a life partner. I want to find something. Every single one of us probably has something that we're waiting on God to do. And I'm challenging each and every single one of us today to say, God, I'm done. I'm done anticipating what you're going to do. I just release it to you to do. Because sometimes we get in the way. Sometimes God has a purpose and a plan, but just like the Israelites in the desert, we spend 20 years meandering because we're trying to do it our way. When it could have taken a few days, a year, God's way. God has so much more for you than what you can plan yourself. So quit planning it yourself. My favorite Bible verse, Proverbs 16:9, for in their hearts humans choose their path, but God chooses their steps. God is making me live this verse. Because every single step I take, I'm like, okay, Lord, I don't know where this one's going to go, but I trust you with it. Living on faith. Because you know the most amazing thing about waiting on the Lord? You know what it teaches you to do? To lean on him. And by leaning on the Lord, what do? You learn to what? Trust him. All of a sudden, he becomes like a dad. All of a sudden, he becomes like a friend. All of a sudden, you start seeing God as if somebody you can just talk to. It's not oh, holy thou, Father. You're like, hey, Dad, I trust you relentlessly. See, God gave me this sermon during my wedding, but it's a sermon for each and every single one of us every day. To say, God, I release this day, I release this moment, I release my plans, I release anything I could come up with for what you have in store for me. Yesterday alone, I applied this to my life. I said, God, I'm done. I want to go get a Starbucks. I'm going to go get a Starbucks. I said, I'm done. And God used me to minister to 3 people. And it was funny because God immediately challenged me to do this because Rick all of a sudden was like, hey, do you want to go to the haircut stylist with me? And I was like, I would really prefer to get my sermon. But then the Lord, he didn't even know this. You didn't even know this, brother, immediately spoke to me and he said, I thought you were trusting me with today. I was like, oh. And then we went to Sports Clips and literally every single worker was lined up listening to us like it was a church service. And we got to pray over every single one of them. See, every single day is the Lord's. And when you walk with full abandonment just towards what God has in store for you, it changes everything. So I have a question, and I'll end with this question. Is God worth waiting for? Would you rather have what you have planned or have what God has planned? And what today do you need to surrender to the Lord? Bow your heads with me. Dear Heavenly Father, God, I thank you so much for this moment. I thank you so much for this day where we get to praise your name. God, I thank you for being a faithful God. I thank you for being a just Father. I thank you for being a God who has such a beautiful plan in store for us. I thank you for each and every single person in this room and how you have ministered to them today. God, I pray as they leave here that they relinquish control and they say, Lord, my life, my day, my timing, every hour, every second is yours. Have your way with me and change their lives drastically because of their faithfulness. Move in our midst, God. Move in our midst and let every single one of us leave here not as broken, shattered people of the world, but as ambassadors for your kingdom, as children of you. I love you, Lord. Praise your name and you be glorified. In Jesus' name.